Warm greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's pre-27th Nigerian Economic Summit virtual event. My name is Irene David Arinze. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Black Advisory Limited, as well as the founder of Leader Network, an online TV network that aims to raise the next generation of successful African entrepreneurs through thought-provoking conversations with business leaders. Today, we would be engaging panelists on bridging the housing and urban development divide in Nigeria. And this is one of many pre-NES 27 conversations that would envision strategies to reverse Nigeria's poor economic trends to achieve high and sustained growth and bring Nigeria back on its path to assuming its economic potential. The 27th Nigerian Economic Summit, with the theme Securing Our Future, the Fierce Urgency of Now, is scheduled to hold on the 25th and 26th of October 2021. If you haven't registered, kindly go on the website to pre-register now. We would also like to do a little housekeeping rule before we commence. Please, all participants should kindly turn off their microphones for us to have a seamless conversation. And if you have any questions during the panel discussion, please type them into the question box in your Zoom or YouTube control panel. I'll definitely bring them up during the panel discussion, and we would have time for questions and answers at the end. I'm your moderator for this virtual event. And at this point, I would also like to invite Mrs. Wonu Adetayo, who is a board member of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, for the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so very much, and a warm welcome to everyone. Distinguished heads of ministries, departments and agencies, captains of industries, heads of associations, donor communities, gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the board and management of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, I would like to welcome our distinguished and erudite panelists. One of them is one of my colleagues sometime past my odd 3 decades of career. And our highly esteemed participants, I really warmly welcome you on behalf of the Nigerian Economic Summit Board and Management to this NESG 27 pre-summit event. This event is on bridging the housing and urban developmental divide. Now, the webinar of today is one of the pre-summit events of the 27th Nigerian Economic Summit, which is jointly organized by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning. The pre-summit events are geared towards engaging stakeholders in a series of virtual conversations. And we've been doing this in the weeks leading to the 27th Nigerian Economic Summit, which obviously has now been announced again that it will be holding on October 25th and 26th, 2021. And I also want to lend my voice to urge you, if you have not registered, please go to the website and pre-register yourself. It promises to be a very, very interesting and fruitful time. Now, the conversations and outcomes of the pre-summit events will form part of the overall summit conversation. At the summit, public and private sector stakeholders will gather together. The obvious reasons would be to explore and conceptualize ways that it can reverse the poor economic trends that we have currently, to also think about how to improve the human capital base of the Nigerian economy, to mitigate the current security challenges that we're facing, and to lay the necessary foundation that will leapfrog Nigeria into a future of high, sustained, and inclusive economic growth. There's absolutely no doubt that the following factors have created a perfect storm to fuel severe housing shortage. One, increasing population of our dear country is growing at an alarming rate of 3.75% per annum. Second, rising rate of rural-urban migrations, obviously due to the fact that a lot of states are somehow economically disempowered to make a difference to their citizens. Thirdly, chronic insecurity, which is driving migration of the internally displaced people. And last but not the least, the impact of climate change that we're facing. These factors are collectively putting a huge strain on urban development and causing an associated infrastructure deficit, as well as negatively impacting the environment. See, this precarious situation calls for the first urgency of now on all relevant stakeholders, because we all need to give urgent and strategic attention to reforming our national urban planning development and regeneration for purposes of effectively managing the increasing urban populations. As of this current moment, it is largely embarrassing and painful to announce that 69% of our urban population are living in slums. Therefore, neglecting this call for a reformed national urban planning will further heighten the crisis of slum-like conditions that have developed in our beloved country. This will inevitably exacerbate indignity, poverty, fear, and poor quality of life, whilst worsening the insecurity situation in our nation. It is on this premise that today's pre-summit event has been tagged rightfully Bridging the Housing and Urban Development Divide. And I'm delighted to note that today is also World United Nations Habitat Day, which incidentally is focused on deliberating and addressing issues that can facilitate all Nigerians to own or have access to decent, safe, and sanitary housing in healthy environments with infrastructure services at affordable costs and with secure tenure. As you can see, all minds are going in the same direction, globally and nationally. It is therefore our earnest expectation at the NESG that by the end of today's deliberation, justice will have been done regarding the challenges facing our progress, and implementable strategies will be formulated that will help to bridge the gap in housing and urban development in Nigeria to meet the rising present and future housing and urbanization needs of Nigerians. On behalf of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, the board, and the management, I want to say thank you to every one of you for joining us for this crucial conversation. We look forward to a fruitful and progressive deliberation. God bless you, and God bless our nation, Nigeria. Thank you very much as I hand you over to Irene.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Wonu, for that very insightful welcome address. And at this point, as I earlier mentioned, the theme for this pre-summit conversation is bridging the housing and urban development divide in Nigeria. And we've seen increasing population, rising rate of rural-urban migration, as Mrs. Wonu has rightly said. And to really speak about this particular challenge that we're bedeviled with, we'll be having an in-depth conversation regarding this with a lineup of very seasoned speakers. I'd like the technical department to kindly share their bios as I read them out. Thank you. Okay, while we wait for that, our first panelist would be Hakeem Oguniran, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Eximia Realty Co. Limited, as well as Home for Me Nigeria Limited and other companies. He's a non-executive chairman of the board of directors of the Lagos Building Investment Co. PLC. Prior to this, he served as the managing director of UACN Property Development Co. PLC from 2010 to 2018, and is the managing director of MDS Logistics, a division of UAC from 2000 to 2010. We also have Mr. Claudio Alcioli Jr., who is an architect and urban planner, a development practitioner with more than 30 years experience in planning, design, management, implementation, and evaluation of housing and urban development policies and projects in over 25 different countries. He's the author of books and articles dealing, for example, with housing development, planning and design, slum upgrading, urban informality, urban density, strategic planning, and participatory urban management. Prior to now, he worked as the program director at GIZ, Sustainable and Innovative Cities and Regions, as well as at the United Nations Habitat. We also have Dr. Chi Akpoji, who is a well-published author with over 20 years experience in development finance, who also played a key role in the startup of Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company and is the Director of Policy, Corporate Strategy and Business Development. Dr. Akpoji served as advisor to the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy, where she assisted in the execution of several economic reforms, which yielded between 4% and 6% GDP growth from 2012 to 2014, and has led to the recognition of Nigeria's economy as the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. She holds an MA and PhD, has executive management certificates from Harvard and Wharton Business School. She's currently a non-executive director at Shelter Afrique, Kenya. And also we have the delectable Ms. Ime Okon, the SSA to the President on Infrastructure and Infrastructure Policy Development and Implementation expert with over 18 years experience in various sector reforms and public-private transactions. Ime began her career at the Bureau of Public Enterprises in 2002, where she was a key member on the team that contributed to the successful privatization of 23 terminals of the Nigerian ports. She also participated in the reform work for the railway, aviation, river basins, and energy sector. She was also a member of the 7-man team mandated from BPE to operationalize the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission in 2005. And finally, we have Professor Ademola Samuel Omojola, who is a professor of geography at the University of Lagos. He has conducted, supervised, and published various research works in remote sensing and GIS applications for environmental studies in Nigeria. He's a steering committee member of the Urban Climate Research Network, Earth Institute, Columbia University. He's also a member of the African Association of Remote Sensing of the Environment, American Association of Geographers, the Nigerian Geographical Association, and Geoinformation Society of Nigeria, amongst others. He has widely advised and consulted for national and international organizations such as UNICEF, World Health Organization, GTZ, and the World Bank. Thank you so much to all our panelists who will be partaking in this very important conversation today. Okay, so let's get right to this. And I'd like to bring up Professor Omojola for the first question. It'd be to sort of set the tone and data context for which our conversation today would ride on. Kindly update us on what data shows about the current housing data gap and any data on the rural-urban migration in recent times. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Thank you very much. With respect to the data gaps, I think I would like to look at it from the spatial perspective because it makes more meaning than even the looking at the data directly, the lump sum. What has been happening is the fact that we all know the need for, urban development management. But unfortunately, we are like magicians when it comes to managing them because we don't really have enough data. How do I mean? Number one, the urban outlay or even housing outlay and everything in the country, we don't really have a very good perspective. For instance, there's no, forget the nuances about the fact that we are doing GIS and we are doing urban GIS. Many cities or many centers in Nigeria do not have proper cadastre. And it would be a shame at this very level if we don't have a proper cadastre. How do we manage our cities? And in fact, there's no layout. The only layout you can see is possibly those estates that are built by commercial estate owners or government layouts, which are very few. So what you see, in essence, is the fact that the people are ahead of government in most cases. So because there's no data, so you just see sporadic, amorphous kind of urban development where people just dot every nooks and corners with everything. Sometimes they even build before they go and get permission. So that's the way we've been doing things. And it's till today is still very unfortunate. So mapping is my key area here about the data. The gap in mapping is huge. And this is a big opportunity for even the new upcoming graduates and even the local government. And I can see here the failure of the local government and the fact that they don't really have a layout of, of their environment. How I'm not sure there's any local government person or chairman or management team that can tell you the numbers of properties that are really within its jurisdiction, whether through proper systematic titling or the customary titling or whatever. We don't have that. So till then, the cadastral system is lacking. And what you see, thank God for the new technology of remote sensing, where people are just getting things on building property boundaries. That's the best you can see. You see property boundaries, you see all those things, and from there you can count. And a lot of international organizations are even intervening in our country beyond what we are doing. For instance, Facebook for some time did some mapping or population estimation using the houses in Nigeria. And when we do population census, we say it's a population and housing census. But where are these houses? It has never really been seamlessly mapped till date. And then Google of recent gave a new map showing the property boundaries, in fact, not for Nigeria alone, all over Africa and most parts of the world. But we are not leveraging on them. We are not using them for anything. It doesn't trickle into the decision-making processes that we have. And the implication of this is what is even key to me. The implication is the fact that is what is causing the poor infrastructure development. Whereas water, electricity, gas, roads, telecoms, and waste collection, they are very poor. And you see everybody digging at the same time, burying what they've dug and build, again and again. So the infrastructural implication is too huge and it's costing us a lot of money. You see a road that is being constructed, the day they are constructing it, they are now digging it up again. Somebody is putting something in because we don't really have all this. And these are the roles of the local government that is properly functioning. And if they are not properly functioning, maybe the state should be able to assist them in getting all these records straight. And again, like I said, the big opportunity is there to service, even the job and unemployment things, and a lot of technologies. Some of these local government can even take ordinary small drones, can do some of these things so that they can have an outlay of their properties. So this is not rocket science anymore. It's very easy to do. So the gap is really high. So in essence, what are we developing? What are we planning if we don't really have a knowledge of the resource base itself? So that's the scenario.
Thank you very much for that insightful background for the, as a platform for this conversation this afternoon. And at this point, I would also like to move to the SSA, Ime Okon. Now, as the world's population continues to increase, of which Nigeria is definitely not left out, affordable housing is not being developed at the same pace. Currently, no state in Nigeria has been able to meet the population demand of developing affordable homes, emphasis on affordable homes. What has made this such a Herculean task, for the government? Kindly unmute. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you for the question. With what is happening right now in the world, I would be surprised if anybody or any government around the world can or would have been able to meet any of the target that they set in terms of developing affordable homes. And I don't see any difference, for our own state, because we are all just coming out of a pandemic and a recession. So for me, I think it's quite understandable if some states are falling, behind in their plan to developing affordable housing. And from what I also see as a government worker, generally some of the states like Lagos, frontrunner states, Ogun State, Ekiti, some of them, they've been, up and about in what they are trying to do in terms of affordable housing. And then if you also look at some states in the Northeast that has to do with displacement issues as a result of insurgency, they've tried to make sure that they provide housing for their citizens. So, but speaking specifically, in terms of the program which the federal government is collaborating with the states on, I see most of the states have been very forthcoming with all the requirements we've asked for, most of the requirements that we've asked for. And I'll give an example of the Family Homes Fund Program and the National Housing Program being implemented by the Ministry of Works. Almost all the states across board have provided land, which was one key request that we made of the states. And so provision of the land, and they've also given their full commitment to the full implementation of the program. In my own opinion, when this program are fully implemented, I see that the state can easily just count that as part of their own, contribution to providing affordable housing. So in a nutshell, I'll say they've done what they can do within the circumstances that everyone across the world have found themselves, the recession, the pandemic, and all of that. But I dare say they can do more, because in terms of the reforms that is being championed by NMRC in terms of the mortgage and the foreclosure laws, yes, the subnationals, they've fallen behind in trying to, institute some of this reform, but we still have some front-runner states that have gone ahead to implement the laws and created, institutions that would implement the law for their states. So they have done what they can do within their powers. But the question you also asked around it being an Herculean task, I still see a lot of issues on capacity, because some of the states, the way they operate in terms of providing housing for their citizens is around their state housing boards, the state land bureau, the state urban planning and development authority, and more recently, they also have the state mortgage and foreclosure authority. So some of these states would need some form of enhancement of their capacity, because a lot of them still operate very, old and manual systems that naturally would not enable them to be effective and be able to meet, the needs of the state in terms of affordable housing. So the challenges are there. You can see most of them have issues of inefficient land administration process and improper classification of the urban and rural areas, and estimation of fair value of the land assets. So they've done what they can do, but they still need, a lot of support. And I dare say here it's where we'll probably need the private sector more. We need the professional bodies and, to work with the states, to work with the housing corporations to see how they can help them, with the resources that they have, to also turn around most of the resources to enable them produce or develop the houses that the citizens require.
Thank you very much. And one key thing that you did mention here was the issue on capacity. We definitely know that we are not a sparsely populated country. And this would lead me directly to Claudio now, if he's on the call.
Yes. Let me share directly my screen and go straight to my presentation. Good morning,
thank you very
ladies.
much, Claudia.
Thank
Over
you.
to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here with you and share some of the experience which I find relevant for the ongoing policy discussions that are taking place in Nigeria at the moment, facing these enormous challenges where more than half of the population lives in slums and an incredible housing needs through which government policies and the markets are not able to resolve. Well, I usually would like to spend a minute about talking about what we mean about housing. Do we speak the same language? It's more than just a building bricks and mortars. So this is a diagram I have developed many years ago and have been used by several organizations, which help us to understand that housing is much more than a single building unit, is the combination of components like the building materials provision with the industry of the building construction, the whole value chain from raw materials to distribution, the industry of housing finance with all the legislation to protect lenders and borrowers. We have the supply of land, particularly service land, with all the bundle of rights associated to that so that the market and the security of tenure can actually be achieved. The provision of a range of infrastructure that nowadays includes the network for internet, cable, different types of cable circulating in association with residential space, and the provision of labor, unskilled labor, but trained labor, well-capacitated labor with all the elements to provide the scale of provision of quality. And through government interventions, we have a governance system provided by institutions that are responsible for different components, but also the legal and regulatory frameworks which establish what I call the governance of the housing sector. For Nigeria to address its challenges at the moment, it needs to address the governance of the housing sector and provide institutions and regulatory framework for everyone to be able to work towards the delivery of affordable housing. So through actions and policies from private, public, community-based NGOs, combining these sectors, in the end, we have the provision of affordable and adequate housing. Now, but housing is also in Nigeria is part of this covenant, the economic covenant of economic, social, and cultural rights. You know, there are 171 countries that are party of that, which means they have committed to provide opportunities for individuals and households, their nationals, to access adequate housing. And what is this right? This right, defined as the right to live somewhere in peace, safety, and dignity, with access to basic infrastructure in a location that allows adequate access to jobs and opportunities and urban service, all at affordable price. So people should be able to afford that. So finance must be made available. But also location in relation to jobs and opportunities is important, not mentioning infrastructure. So these 7 components of adequacy lead us to define very important policy framework through which we can make the housing sector to work towards scale-up solutions and opportunities for different income groups and the market to function adequately. So we know by now, and globally, that the lack of affordable housing leads to informal urbanization and the growth of slums and creates the social spatial exclusion that Nigerian cities, like many other cities in the world, are facing. Now, when we look about the policies, what are the policies available to really intervene in positively. Some governments have opted to intervene in the supply side of the market, which means reducing the costs, making more efficient the production costs of housing so that the dwelling price is coming to a level that people can afford the monthly payment, or policies that focus on the demand, which means increasing the ability of people to pay for housing. So when we see the transition that the European countries did in the last 20 years, they have moved towards policy that focus on the demand side. So when we see that, these are the policy interventions that we need to look at. On one side, the cost of land, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of finance, tax on property transfer, norms and laws regulating rental housing. So several elements that should be incorporated in the government intervention. And here is where we see a lot of innovation taking place in the world, where Nigeria could have a deep look on the experiences of countries that went towards providing fiscal incentives, vouchers, income and cash transfer, so that allows people to go either through government program or market provision to access adequate housing. So these are the experience, and I'm not going, because I only have 9 minutes, I have spoken already 5, so I'm not going to go through all that, but these are the countries that I have worked at or that I have studied well. So you have different programs, like in Brazil, big country like Nigeria, so implementing a national multi-billion-dollar program, having a bank as an implementing agency, and then having a very clear national local municipality relationship that through which local governments provide land. So that's an interesting model. The other models where you see common is that Mexico and Singapore and the Netherlands and South Korea is to establishing a housing fund through which both middle income groups and low income groups can access mechanisms to access affordable housing, which means affordable finance schemes that allows for land acquisition on one hand and acquisition of mortgage. Now, let's go to the issue that was on the question that the organizers put to me on terms of slum upgrading. You have in Nigeria a huge population living in slums. So it's a question of intervening with improvement strategies where it is possible, opening streets, providing infrastructure, doing planning, regularizing land. So interventions that allow these areas of the city to be incorporated into the urban management system of the city. But it has to be done together with the provision of opportunities for new housing and improvements in the existing stock through land supply, housing finance, planning for growth, regulatory reform, improving the capacity of the building industry. So it's a combination between improve and prevent. So we need to provide alternatives so that people don't go to informal land development, because otherwise you will lose control, you will lose the whole fight against informality in the cities. Now, this needs to be a single policy. So in the last 2 minutes that I have, I will move to some experience like Mexico. What did Mexico did? They privatized social property of land and allow developers to acquire large parcels of land and create a land banking. At the same time, it had a national housing fund with compulsory contributions from employees and employers, and created a very creative, let's say, institutional regulatory framework. But the problem in Mexico is that urban policies was not connected with the housing policies. And what happened there? Massive production of housing, 400 to 600,000 units per year during a period of 12 years. So, but it was producing housing estates of this scale where distance, location to service, and opportunities for income generation made these areas very difficult to live in. So the result is that after 12 years, we found 4.9 million housing units abandoned, vacant, under-occupied, which represented 14% of the housing stock. So this is something that it's a puzzle at the moment in Mexico. Now, to finalize my talk, since I finished my time, the interesting solutions found in Singapore, which is very strong government intervention in the supply of land, service land, a very strong approach to urban planning and design, and the establishment of a national housing fund called the Central Provident Fund, or CPF, creating an institutional framework that provided public housing access to every Singaporean in that country. And it's a very interesting lesson that many Asian countries are following. China, India, Philippines, they're all following the same approach of creating that fund where people can access, let's say, credit, and the market players can access that to develop new housing. And then you have these situations where you have good quality of housing and 80% of the population in Singapore living in publicly provided housing. So I stop here. I think there is a wealth of experience in the world that I recommend our Nigerian counterparts to look at more in depth and see what is that suitable to address this enormous challenge that you have in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudio. I must commend your timekeeping skill, exactly 10 minutes. Thank you so much. And I think this is a very important time to call in Dr. Chi to maybe address a couple of things that I know Claudio did mention a lot, but two things that I picked, which I feel your experience can come in here, things regarding the land banking, National Housing Fund. Would you like to address some of the things that Claudio did talk about during his presentation?
Okay, you mentioned land banking and
National Housing Fund. I have my questions, of course, because I mean, at the end of the day, while we're trying to build affordable housing, nobody's going to hand houses over to us for free, right? Which is a very pertinent thing that we must put into consideration. I do have questions regarding mortgage plans, but I want you to address some things that Claudio talked about here. Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't actually prepared to follow up on Claudio's wonderful presentation. But on the issue of land banking, as we all know, that is one of the major, well, I call it constraints facing the housing finance ecosystem in Nigeria. Maybe at this point, let me share my screen and show you a checklist of some of these constraints facing the housing market ecosystem in Nigeria as a starting point for my intervention. Let me see. Okay, here.
Maybe I should also just include the question that I have framed for you as well. I mean, like I said prior to now, nobody's going to send houses to us for free, no matter how much we're trying to work on affordable housing. However, the current volatility in the country's economy hasn't made things smooth. Would you kindly share your experience as regards both the demand and the supply side, respectively?
Yes, thank you. We all know that a strong mortgage market is critical to enabling access to housing and to really improving the housing market ecosystem in Nigeria. There's been some appreciable progress towards strengthening the housing markets in Nigeria. And I think as referenced by both Professor Mojala and the SSA to the president. I mean, you have institutions like the NMRC, you have the strengthening of the microfinance institutions, strengthening of the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, which actually deals with the National Housing Fund that you referenced in your question, and then the ongoing effort to set up the Nigeria Mortgage Guarantee Company. Obviously, there's also the launch and operationalization of the Family Homes Fund as the largest social housing fund in sub-Saharan Africa. Let us put this in greater context. By 2012, mortgage to GDP ratio in Nigeria stood at 0.6%. This is really poor when you compare to what it obtains in other economies, In South Africa in 2012 was 18%. In Ghana, just next door, it was 2%, and then 75% in the US. But as of 2019, CBN estimated that this has risen to 1.3%. A small increase, but at least appreciable. The point is that there's been some appreciable progress, but it's not enough. Because despite this progress, the fundamental constraints still remain. And that brings me to the slide I've just shared. I hope you can all see the slide on your screens. The issues of the, span both the supply and demand side of the housing finance ecosystem. On the supply side, let me quickly go through some of the constraints. The issue of developer financing, the high cost of funds continues to serve as a barrier for developers to access necessary funds for developing housing on housing estates across the country. So many are constrained to just access the funds at very high rates and build houses for the upper echelons of our society, and leaving the lower income bracket where the need is greatest out of the equation. And you might say this is where social housing programs such as the family that being promoted by family homes funds come in. But still, that doesn't obviate the need that the fact that this constraint remains major. Despite progress by states like Kaduna, Lagos, Ogun State, and so on, most governors still hang on tenaciously to the tenets of the Land Use Act of 1978. And I hope at some point we'll discuss the issue of legislation and how it's really critical, to moving the needle forward. They still cling on to it. Many are yet to adopt, the model mortgage and foreclosure law, which NMRC has been promoting to states as a sine qua non for a viral, robust housing market. Many are yet to establish state mortgage boards that will really streamline and expedite all systems and processes towards both land acquisition to property registration to development, as well as the mortgage financing. It also impacts infrastructure, because once there's limited land available, of course, there's limited land available for construction of sewers, roads, and water systems, and so on. There's the issue of capacity. We all know of the very low level of skills for a lot of developers. Many of them are fly-by-night developers, and a lot of the buildings being constructed are being built, had flaws, and that's why you have incidences of building collapse, such as flood the news media from time to time. Very sad, with very sad consequences. On the demand side, you have constraints of income. A cursory glance at the income pyramid for Nigeria will show that majority of Nigerians fall squarely under the lower income to lower middle income group. So basically, they're unable to afford mortgages, not to mention the houses that are available. Issue of mortgage financing, again, the high cost of funds is a major one here. Is a major constraint there. Despite the fact that there's been some progress within the industry, for example, with streamlining of underwriting standards and specific underwriting standards for specific groups, from the formal to the informal to diasporan and so on. And the fact that you have longer tenor mortgages available now from the short tenor mortgages of the past, like 3 to 5 years, you now have 15 to 20-year mortgages. Despite all this progress, access to mortgage finance remains, I don't want to use the pipe dream, but remains limited for a lot of Nigerians. NMRC in a recent presentation said that so far, it has gone to the capital market 3 times to raise funds, long-term funds, and has been able to inject up to 30 billion naira into the Nigerian mortgage market. When I heard that, I was quite pleased, but I was also asking myself, we don't have data on how much the impact of that 30 billion naira on the Nigerian mortgage market and consequently on access to housing within the market. There's no data on how many mortgages have been refinanced. There's no data on how many new mortgages have been created. So the question remains, mortgage banks, the primary mortgage banks, as well as the commercial banks offering mortgages, to what extent are they meeting up with their obligations? And then last but not least, the issue of demographics. Previous speakers have referenced the issue of population and growing urbanization, which underpins everything that we're doing at this platform today. It's probably even more critical in the case of Nigeria because of the rapid population growth rate, with estimates are that Nigerian population at the current rate will hit 400 to 450 million people by 2050, which is alarming. At our current rate of close to 200 million, we have a housing deficit of between 17 and 23 million units. One wonders what this deficit will be when it hits that mark of 400 or 450 million people. So, of course, underpinning both the supply and demand side issues is that of regulation. The actual players, the regulators of the housing finance system. We have the central bank, you have the SEC, obviously you have the federal government represented by both the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Works and Housing. What role have they played at the policymakers? Have they come up with policies informed by data that will really lead to informed decision-making to benefit the population? To what extent are they working to facilitate access to housing or the strengthening of the housing finance ecosystem within Nigeria? Let me stop there for now. I hope I'll stay within my 9 minutes limit, and I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding what I've just said. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. You certainly kept the time. Just a few seconds left to 9 minutes.
Okay.
I would hold your thought there regarding the regulations. I'll definitely go to the SSA email Okon regarding that. But I would like to call on Hakeem at this point. Now, what is your take on the intentionality of public-private partnerships in ensuring the faster development of affordable housing, at least to cushion the impact of high cost of building and property ownership costs? Yeah, we did hear Dr. Chi mention high cost of funds, particularly when it comes to building. Over to you, Hakeem.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, a whole lot of things are running through my head, as I listen to the other participants. First of all, I'd like to stress that I'm a developer, and in my previous life, when I was CEO for UPDC, I've led development in about 7 major cities in Nigeria. And that puts me in a position to really speak to some of the issues that have been raised, even by Claudio. I also like to stress that a lot of work has been done. We've made some progress. So I was trying to put everything in context as I was thinking about this program for today. So just to put everything in context, where we are in Nigeria, there are a lot of interventions. I think the first thing that we must know, we must take a cue from the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, which recognizes housing as one of the key infrastructure sectors in Nigeria. That's very important. Not only that, the master plan also recognizes housing as one of the underserved sectors. So 4 sectors were identified as underserved, and priority attention was meant to be given to these sectors over a 5-year period, which we really have not seen. The third thing I'd like to just mention, just to put everything in context also, is that the National Urban Development Policy, which incidentally was mentioned in the concept notes for this webinar, clearly identifies the need to promote a system of well-managed urban settlements. So if we pull all this together, now to answer your question specifically, I've always stressed that all over the world, where governments have been able to solve the issue of affordable housing, what you find is that government builds a collaborative platform for several players. In the US, in Canada, in China before the bubble, in South Africa, which is a country that's also recorded significant success in providing affordable housing. They build a collaborative platform of government, of developers, of financiers, of suppliers, of regulators, and they usually create a special window that helps to drive affordable housing in the supply. Now, we've done a lot in Nigeria, but many of the things that we have done disparately. And I hear Dr. Chi mention the progress being made by NMRC, but I always stress that NMRC is a liquidity creating vehicle. NMRC is supposed to create liquidity when mortgages have been created by primary mortgage institutions. Now, for mortgages to be created, assets have to be created, first of all. So unless we're able to create a platform that creates a clear handshake of the entire ecosystem, we're going to run into the kind of problem that we currently run. The question speaks about cost of housing, and I'd just like to put one or two things in context. Before COVID, February 2020, cost of reinforcement, a critical building material component, was 140,000 naira per metric ton. After the lockdown, the price shot up to 180,000. As I speak to you today, it's above 400,000 naira. So it's very difficult in such a situation to begin to say that you're trying to deliver affordable housing. Public-private partnership, and unfortunately, government does not have enough resources to deliver these houses, and that creates the need for PPP. And I think that PPP is the way to go in this respect. Government has to put something on the table, and the private sector also has to bring things, some value to the table. And by working together, we will be able to create the kind of houses which are reasonably affordable to the people. Unfortunately, Claudio spoke about land banking. Unfortunately, in this country, because of the Land Use Act, land is vested in the states of the federation. It is difficult for you to do land banking. And I've always said that the issue is not about revoking the Land Use Act. It's about implementation of the Land Use Act. Because what the states have done, governors have done, is that they've created land use that they've turned land use that into a revenue generating instrument, which was not supposed to be the intention. It was supposed to be an instrument for planning. It was supposed to be an instrument for equitable distribution of land. But today, it has been turned around. And I think that as we begin to think of really, really solving the housing problem in this country, we have to create that platform, that will help us to access land. Dr. Chi mentioned the issue of access to land. I always say that the number one problem of housing in this country is access to good titled land. And it's the case of land. There's land everywhere, but I'm talking good titled land. If you look at the attributes of housing, affordable housing that Claudio mentioned, number one is security of tenure. Security of tenure comes with the title. Good titled land is very critical. We have to begin to think of now solving these problems one after the other. And let me just add, Dr. Chi already mentioned the issue of access to land. I'd like to add the issue of permitting and approval. Permitting and approval is a major issue because today we deal with multiple regulatory agencies from the beginning, both at pre-development, during development, and post-development, and it just increases your cost unnecessarily. The issue of inadequacy of infrastructure. Today, we always say that every developer in Nigeria is a mini local government onto yourself because you prepare your primary infrastructure, your secondary infrastructure, and this just adds to the cost. I remember I did a project in Abuja, Metro City in Abuja, and the Honorable Minister at that time, she came to commission the first phase of the project, and she saw the level of infrastructure. And I told her that because we have to produce our own power, we have to create the access roads, we have to pay compensation for the access roads. Infrastructure cost as a percentage of our development cost was like 13%, and that made no sense. Best practice should be between 2 and 4%. So these are the areas that we need to look at. And I'm just going to stop here for now, and then look at other questions as time goes on. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you so much, Hakeem, for such an insightful and informative context in which you've brought. And this really just seamlessly takes me to the next question, which I'll be directing to the SSA, Email Kun, if you're still connected. All right, I see you. Yes, Hakeem did talk a lot about, the land use and the need to access good titled lands, which is very important. Now, the Nigerian government has tried to cushion the housing gap with various interventions and schemes. We've had the 1992 Urban Development Policy, the National Housing Scheme, and the recent Economic Recovery Plan, which included substantial aspects for housing and urban development, launched under the Vice President's office. Where are we on this, and what progress is being made on the implementation of existing policies and the clamor for an updated Land Use Act? And not also having issues where 2-3 people are saying they own one particular land. Over to you.
Yeah, I would. I'll start with pointing out. I think you use an older version of the urban development policy. You mentioned the 1992. There's a 2012 urban development policy.
2006, 2012 updated.
Yes. So that's what we're currently implementing. And as we speak right now, the Ministry of Works and Housing is reviewing the 2012 urban development policy. And the policy initially was supposed to be reviewed every 5 years, but there was delay in starting the process. But right now, process has started, and we're anticipating that before the end of this year, the validation workshop will be held to consult stakeholders on the review process and what the government has put in line for stakeholders to comment on. But specifically, before now, we really didn't have insurgency issue, and that has impacted housing significantly, like what we see currently. So the urban development policy would also address issues on security, displacement of people, and also the pandemic. But bottom line, we're trying to come up with a policy that is very flexible and can adapt to any unforeseen circumstances. So that process is on right now. And as I said, by December, we should, get a final copy that we can discuss with our stakeholders. And then on the national housing schemes, I already mentioned what the government is doing through the Ministry of Works, through the Federal Mortgage Bank, through the Federal Housing Authority. We have different interventions, which, like you rightly mentioned, that we've tried to use to bridge the housing divide. And then we also have the Family Homes Fund, and most recently under the Economic Sustainability Plan. So those projects are currently ongoing, but for the National Housing Program under the ministry, the first phase has been completed. The government is just trying to finalize the mode at which these houses will be taken by the public. So just going through the process of, selecting or finalizing the criteria and how the public can express interest in some of these houses, and also coming up with the final prices that these houses will go for. As we see, we are coming out of a recession, and I dare say that some of these houses may have to be subsidized to enable, ordinary Nigerians to be able to afford them. But for the National Housing Scheme, again, we also have a policy program that we're currently working with the private sector on. We have one of the private sector companies working with the Ministry of Housing to come up with a national housing strategy. And that program has been on for over a year now. And housing strategy in the sense that we have several interventions which the government has tried to implement since we became independent, and there's a lot of clamor that some of those programs the citizens are not feeling them. So now what are we doing to try to ensure that all our initiatives are harmonized and, come up with a roadmap that every institution in the housing sector would need to follow through to ensure that each program that they all implement, goes towards a particular goal of achieving, affordable housing for Nigerians. So on the economic recovery program that is currently being implemented by the Family Homes Fund, the government has shown in good faith, because when we started the sensitization, we got a lot of feedback. At that time, we had houses that are going for as less as 2 million naira for 1 bedroom, and 3.5 for 2 bedroom, and then 4.5 to 5 for 3 bedrooms. And we had some, complaint like, really, are you going to be able to build houses for, this rate? And is this not another white elephant project of government? And we were able to, convince Nigerians that this is not another white elephant project. And the government showed faith by disbursing an amount of money to the CBN. So right now, the Family Homes Fund is in the last phase. They've received approval from their board for some projects in the states. And this program also would, initially when I started, when I answered your first question on how the states are doing in delivering affordable housing, and I raised the issue of capacity of the state housing corporations. So this Family Homes program that I just mentioned now, the National Housing Program that Family Homes is implementing, they are working with the State Housing Corporation. And in our opinion, this is so that that process of them learning and working with Family Homes Fund will build their capacity to be able to implement such state-funded program in the future by themselves. So we've had approvals from the Family Homes Board for some states, about 7 to like 8 states that the program can start off with. So once these projects are approved by the CBN, then the developers are already on site building the houses. So for the economic sustainability plan, work is already ongoing vis-a-vis Family Homes Fund trying to get the approval for funding direct disbursement from the CBN. And then the state have already given all the lands. They've nominated their counterpart, which is their state housing corporations. And we have most of the lands in accessible areas with, existing infrastructure, and some places where we have to build the infrastructure to get to the location. And so in terms of the clamoring for the existing Land Use Act, I've heard some of my colleagues, talk about the unimplementable, Land Use Act that we've had for a while, and what we need to do to reform the Land Use Act. Yes, we all agree, stakeholders are on the same page on this, that the Land Use Act needs to be reformed. But unfortunately, this is a, exclusive prerogative of the state. But the federal government has tried to work with the subnational through the National Economic Council to ensure that they understand the value of the land that they have under their purview. Because if you have land and the land is acting to you as a debt capital, then there's nothing you can do with it. You're just sitting on an asset that you can easily trade. So if you're not willing to reform your system to ensure that you have an asset that you can trade to bring money into your system, then there's nothing anybody can do but to just keep, advocating for them to understand the value of having land that should be easily accessible and, can be tradable. So for the Land Use Act and the reforms that we see that is needed to turn the land into, to make them viable, not to be dead. I mentioned earlier, and other people have also mentioned in terms of the work that NMRC has tried to do. In terms of the work that NMRC has tried to do with the subnational, some of them have taken shape. Lagos has taken shape, Kaduna has taken shape, Edo State and other states are also coming on board. So we're just hoping that by the time a few of the states implement, some of the reforms that we are advocating, they will see the value of having land as a tradable asset rather than a debt capital. So we can only keep advocating. We can only keep advocating to the states, because there's a PwC report that actually stated that Nigeria has an estimated in excess of $300 billion as debt capital in our land. So if we have such an amount of money as debt capital, I really don't know why some of the states would, be in a situation where financing should be an issue for them. All we just have to do is to ensure that the advocacy keeps, going on, and to ensure that they implement some of the reforms that we ask them to implement. And some of them are just as easy as the governor just handing over, the ability for probably the commissioner to sign a CFO and make land titling to be easy and accessible to investors and all.
Thank you.
So that's where we are on that. And from what NMRC has done, we expect that we would have some, good news to share in terms of the reforms that we hope to achieve on the Land Use Act. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, SSA, for that very important insight you gave us there. And you did mention that, of course, we are coming out of a recession, and then, are there possibilities for subsidy? And I would like to move to Dr. Chi at this point. We can't deny how much of an income generating asset owning a home or property really is, albeit we still grapple with initial cost of entry. Are there possible untapped options for subsidy, like Amy did mention right now, by the government for developers? What alternative funding options can we begin to explore, really?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, I like the way you prefaced it by saying that, housing is really important to generating income. There is an inexorable nexus between housing, jobs creation, housing, wealth creation. And that is why, governments really give housing the focus that it should, but just that sometimes we get it right, other times we don't get it right. But definitely housing is a means to wealth creation. I'm sure, I don't know how many of you know that the world's largest economy, which is the economy of the US, of the United States, actually one of its benchmarks for performance is housing statistics. It's housing statistics. So housing stats determine how well the economy is performing or how poorly it is performing. So, the hope is that here in Nigeria, we'll get to that at some point. So it's really important that that nexus is established. Now, to get to your specific question about subsidy for developers, I believe the previous speaker has already mentioned, and I also mentioned it in my earlier answer, the social housing program known as Family Homes Fund, which I think I described as largest social housing fund in Nigeria. And I think one of its products, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, one of its products has to do with access to financing for developers. I believe, because I was part of the process of conceptualizing that entire program. And but since then, I haven't really been fully involved. But I believe one of its products currently, aside, access to, affordable homes for lower income bracket Nigerians and so on, is also subsidies for Nigerian developers to actually provide those lower price houses that Nigerians in lower income brackets can now access. So that is one program that is ongoing now by the federal government. I'm not aware of other subsidy initiatives at the public sector level, directed towards developers. There might be some states, implementing subsidies at the state level, but at the federal government level, the one that is well known and that is currently ongoing is that of the Family Homes Fund. To get back to your second aspect of your question, which is alternative funding options, it's developers, I believe our developers, especially the professional developers, are quite dynamic, and they've been always on the lookout for, for alternative funding sources to actually deliver on their, on their mandates to supply houses, because it's in their own business interest to source for alternative sources of capital. There is patient capital that's available, capital from impact investors, from foundations, and so on. But I also want to make note that in most cases, the sources of alternative funding are now being linked to their adoption of alternative building technologies. And this is the new, well, I call it the new way to go in terms of developer or building of construction finance globally. And I believe it's gaining some traction in Nigeria. There are deep pockets, buckets of funds available for developers willing to actually adopt, alternative building technologies, building more energy efficient buildings with faster turnaround times that will save up on energy, and also at lower cost and will be easily available to Nigerians, most of which are in the lower income bracket. So there's also the issue of green finance. I don't know if any of our developers have looked into that, or whether I believe a green bond has been issued in Nigeria. Please, I would like some of my counterparts to also enlighten me on that. But I did hear that the plans towards issuing a green bond within Nigeria. So these are alternative sources of finance that, that could potentially help with the whole question of constraints of finance or high cost of funds that we're facing regularly within the housing ecosystem in Nigeria. Of course, I was part of the team that launched the IFC's EDGE program in Nigeria. And I believe the certification process for developers is ongoing. And that will open up an entire new bucket of funds for developers who have been able to be certified under that EDGE program. Lastly, I would just like to end by emphasizing two key points that were raised. That's the issue of advocacy. It is so critical. It is so critical. For example, for the new alternative building technologies to actually take hold, there needs to be serious advocacy amongst Nigerians who are used to concrete buildings, for them to begin to accept that no, it doesn't always have to be concrete all the time. There could be alternative building materials, buildings built out of alternative building. So there's that advocacy. Advocacy obviously also helped with the promotion of the model mortgage and foreclosure law, which I referenced earlier, which has now been adopted by a number of states within the Federation, and is really helping towards with progress in uptake of mortgages in these states. There's also the issue of networking. Please, this is really, really critical. Networking among cities, to share knowledge, to come together and share knowledge. And that ties directly to availability of data. When I was at the World Bank, one of the projects I worked upon was on creating network of cities in South Africa, in the Philippines, in India, where they will get together. In South Africa, it's called the South African Cities Network. In the Philippines, it's called the League of Cities of the Philippines. Or you can Google those two. It's where cities of all sizes come together. They share knowledge. They have their data fully updated, data on population, on services. So a number of hospitals, a number of houses, everything available, even street addressing, all available. And they learn from it. It's also a peer review mechanism. So I just wanted to end on that note, that these are issues we need to look at more critically as a means to really moving forward on the mandates for this particular project that we're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chi. And yes, to your question, Nigeria actually issued the green bond at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. I recall I was at that event in Lagos. And I had put this question to Claudio, but just in case Claudio has any additions to—
Sorry, I didn't get your last comment. Sorry, I didn't get, you said something about Nigerian Stock Exchange?
Oh, yes, the green bond was issued. I know I was there when it was, yes. It was
thank you.
At the Nigerian Stock Exchange in Lagos.
Okay, thank you.
And then to Mr. Claudio, I know that Dr. Chi has mentioned a couple of alternative sources. Do you have any additions to this with respect to untapped but feasible housing alternatives? Aside from what Dr. Chi has mentioned, if you have one or two, we have less than 10 minutes to wrap up the conversation. I'd like to go back to Professor and.
So the comment, could you repeat, because I couldn't hear you very well.
Okay, so Dr. Chi, who just spoke, had talked a lot about alternative sources, alternative housing options that we can also explore, right? And then I'm also asking you, do you have other options that she probably did not mention when she was speaking regarding alternative sources beyond the brick and mortar housing?
I would like to call back the question of access to land that my colleague has spoken quite clear. They need to have well-documented, registered, secure land to allow different stakeholders to actually develop land and make sustainable urbanization a reality without any question or any doubt whether that land belongs to someone or not. Because the moment you have doubts about the bundle of rights associated to land, which varies from country to country, then the whole economy is affected. The market cannot function. Banks think the housing is a risk thing. They put interest rates up there, like in Ghana, because of the whole issue of this duality between Roman-based property rights coexisting with customary land ownership, where you have chiefs providing land, which has been provided by local authorities. So there you have, like we found in Ghana, 4,000 court cases on land only in Accra. So this makes housing investment or even any development impossible. So that's why the practice was remittance from abroad. The one that receives, go immediately, and the first one that builds and puts the wall and puts the house will have a stake on the land. We can't function like that. And I know the problem persists in many parts of Nigeria, and I think this needs to be addressed immediately. Now, back to the alternatives to housing. There are things that I observed that in Africa is not well developed, is not stimulated by policy, and that I see in other places of the world. For example, the cooperative housing. Obviously that you need to have land. Cooperatives need to have the ability to acquire land. So there needs to be legislation. There is a whole set of policies that need to be in place. But in Sweden is a very predominant model of housing development. In Uruguay is a very successful housing development, legislation, a whole set of technical assistance to the cooperatives, a whole mobilization, social mobilization, advocacy. So there is a whole thing about to enable low-income residents or low middle-income groups to actually access well-located land in the city. So this is one. The other one that also came from Uruguay and Brazil and is now being transferred to some, let's say, federations of urban poor in Asian countries, which is the self-management housing programs, which in Brazil became a national program. How is it? Is that funding is made available for organized community-based organizations for which there is a whole set of procedures. They have access to finance, they have access to technical assistance, and then they mobilize their groups and residents, and they actually build quality housing. And they are proving that they can build better housing, larger housing, and cheaper housing than the market was building through the conventional system. So there is a variety of, let's say, means to develop housing. And I think that's why I said in the end of my first intervention is that our Nigerian colleagues could look around and provide, like my Dr. Chi said, knowledge, that there is a wealth of knowledge around the world. And I think you need to mobilize this knowledge, cross-fertilize to what is possible to adapt to the Nigerian situation, and then have a strong debate, bring the big players, the finance, the private, the public, the civil society, because otherwise Nigeria is a bigger country, is a big economy. The level of informality that is around the cities is coming to a very dangerous level. And I think the intervention needs to be done yesterday, not today. And it's very good that you are organizing this, because many of you mentioned, if we address housing in a sustainable, consistent, rational way, we actually creating wealth, not only for those who are involved in recipient and providers, but for the nation, because it's economic development. We all know if the housing sector is stumbling, the economy is stumbling. If the economy is going well, it's because the housing sector is going out. Why? Because of the chain, construction, jobs, legislation, housing finance, land. And, you know, it's a powerhouse to proper development. And I think we need to explore that.
Thank you, Claudio. We're really pressed for time now. We have less than 3 minutes to wrap up this panel session, but I quickly want to come to Professor. We can't neglect the need for urban development management, right? And digitization, we've talked about sustainable housing as well, and proper mapping. What has your experience been with the way these are being considered during development of houses? If you can just respond to this in 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I think one of the key things that is still lacking really is still the mapping component of the urban space. For instance, states and LGS needs to be more proactive. They need to be very, very proactive about mapping, especially about property boundary mapping and the generation of things like the orthophoto. Because the orthophoto is like a tool for the planners. It's like you have planners these days that do not even have tools to work with. You're just putting them out there just to fetch. All we are looking for is the revenue from there. But you need to give them tools, or else we continue to have slums. There's no amount of work they do. There's no proper planning, which is based on informed knowledge of the map. There can never be peace on or down land. We need to do that very much. And they can do that by leveraging on existing technologies such as the GNSS technology or man area vehicles, or just let me say remote sensing or geoinformatics. And this mapping again will help in the planning of houses. We don't have the maps. It's the current sporadic people ahead of government planning. It does not solve any problem. The people are always ahead, and you start looking for where to put road, to interpolate where you put utilities and everything. So PPPs, even private partnership, is even difficult because they don't have the base. Now the states and local governments should be ready to give even the private people areas to really build on. And it's a case where you see people building on marginal lands. There's no control because they don't really have a knowledge of this. Marginal lands, floodable areas on slopes that are very critical, and so many other things, places that are prone to hazards and everything. They have been encroached upon. These are supposed to be planned. And when the plans are even there, because there are no tools again, the plans are there, but who uses the master plan? They're just like documents, they throw them away. Because the way the master plans are being done today does not give cognizance to even the spatial context on the land. So you just see things, we're just doing things in disparate means. So we need to be proactive, sit down, plan our cities, or else we won't have even the affordable housing. We will still be prone to insecurity, prone to disaster and everything that are preventable. So that's my take about that. Mapping should be taken seriously. Cadastral or property mapping should be done properly, and orthophotos should be used by planners so that they can plan things very well. And with this digitization, we can really help in reducing the crisis in the urban space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And finally, I would like to end this panel discussion with Hakeem. I mean, you did give us some really scary figures regarding the cost of the kind of work that you do. So what would you suggest would attract both local and foreign investors at this point? What should we start to look at really?
Okay, thank you. Two things I'm just going to say because we're rounding up. Number one, we must always stress that investment capital is rational. They travel in particular directions. And if you're trying to attract funding to housing, there are three drivers. Number one is risk. Number two is return. Number three is regulation. I always call them the 3 R's. So anytime you sit down, you're trying to, whether you're trying to attract traditional funding or you are doing alternative funding, those are very critical. The risk, because any provider of capital is looking at the risk, is looking at the return, because there are competing asset classes, and in a country where MPR is 12-13%, where sometimes government, risk-free government investment could be as high, the yield could be as high as 16-17%, and you're struggling with your real estate, your housing development, where you struggle to be between 5 and 8% yield, like you just can't compete. So risk, return, and regulation. Now, on a general note, recently for the independence anniversary, I granted an interview, and I said, and I want to repeat what I said. I said, for us to solve the housing problem in this country, two things must happen. Number one, we have to commoditize housing, and number two, we have to industrialize the process. We have to commoditize housing. We have to get to a level whereby we can buy and sell and trade houses and real estate pretty much the same way we trade other assets, because liquidity is very key. So to do that, we have to streamline the legal framework. We have to streamline approval processes. We have to streamline perfection processes. These are major constraints. Until we get to people just hold houses. They just can't dispose of them because they are afraid of affecting the title. They're afraid of consent, stamp duty, registration, and things like that. So we have to streamline that and commoditize housing. The second thing, we have to industrialize the process. And Dr. Chi already spoke so eloquently about it. We have to work on standardization. We have to deploy appropriate technology. Most developers today, we are still calling, like I said, Baba Sharafa, Baba Toib to do tiling, to do this, to do that. I have issues with quality. If we have to push the envelope, we have to standardize the process. And the national housing policy stands on 3 tripods. Housing technology is one of them, titling is one of them, financing is one of them. We have taken financing. We have created NMRC. We have to look at the other 2 legs, because unless we integrate the various elements of the value chain, we're just going to continue to struggle. And that is where I think we should be going. Work on commoditizing housing and work on industrializing the process. When we do that, we can begin to deliver the numbers that will help us to push the deficit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. At this point in time, I really would like to say thank you to all of our panelists, Claudio, Ms. Ime, Dr. Chi, Professor Omojola, and Mr. Kim. Thank you so much for your time during the course of this conversation. And we're pressed for time right now. I'd like to go on to the presentation by Mr. Edward Ibekwe, Program Director at Tion Associates, as he presents the National Urban Observatory. The technical department may display his presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Edward, over to you, please.
Yes, please, I'd like to share my screen.
Yeah, it's on display right now. The technical department will work on it as you make a presentation.
That's not my display. Okay, let me just confirm that you can see my screen.
No, we don't see your screen.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Just can you see that now?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. So to get things rolling, I'd like to start by setting a context for this presentation in a way that creates a shared perspective that we can all align with. Now, wherever we talk about project, it's common to have situations where what is delivered is different from what was required simply because there's misunderstanding between parties involved. So in the context of urban renewal, we often find that various stakeholders tend to have different interpretations, from coordinating civic services to economic growth and driving communities, down to technology, even down to what physical environment looks like. But regardless of the various interpretations that exist, stakeholders can only collaborate effectively by harmonizing these potentially diverse views. So a brief overview of the flow. Look into making a case for why a data-driven approach would be helpful. And then we'll look at the current challenges we have with adopting this approach, as well as how we can, or how technology is advancing to help us make sense of the unstructured data that exists. And then we'll end with an example showing the opportunities that exist in analytics and concluding statement. So smartness, BSI defines smartness of a city in terms of the effective integration of physical and digital human systems. And I want to highlight that area. And for Gartner, it talks about how multiple public and private sectors cooperate to achieve sustainable outcomes. So basically you have various stakeholders that play a key role in the society or in the industry, in the sector, coming together to drive a similar outcome. But then smartness in terms of this presentation focuses on the role that technology plays in coordinating the collaboration between these individual systems and stakeholders to deliver positive outcomes for our cities as a whole in a more effective way. So looking at this diagram, one of the things that you notice is, like we said, we have different stakeholders that are contributing to this ecosystem. For the longest time, these stakeholders have been have been siloed, and the siloed nature of these systems undermine any effort to develop collaborative activity. So you see, you have different stakeholders functioning and putting out data, but then it's not effectively getting or moving across the systems, and because of that, we have a shortfall in terms of opportunities to deliver on better outcomes. So to categorize the problem we have with data generally, I'll put them into 3 buckets. So you have the problem of establishing and ensuring data quality. You have the problem of visualization. So you've gathered a whole lot of data, but then it's not really human readable and doesn't make so much sense. And so we need to find a way to visualize this data in a way that makes sense. But then moving from there, you want to be able to address the analytics of this kind of situation, to have a visual, or rather to have this data generate intelligence that can drive better decision making. So efforts at solving these problems, or rather these challenges, are enabling tools to be developed that provide citizens and enterprises, city leaders, with the possibility of faster evidence-based responses to challenges that we face. And we can expect these tools to provide a more holistic approach to housing challenges and to enable integration to take place at a more granular level. So what you're looking at is an example of one of those tools, as an example, that focuses on the housing sector. So there are several indicators that have come together to create a dashboard like this. And one of the immediately noticeable benefits of this is the transparency it creates. So you can see that Dr. Chi was talking about how we can even track the impact of the efforts that have been going into financing. You know, having real-time indicators like this help you monitor what is actually going on, right, in terms of performance. And then it gives every stakeholder a heightened awareness. It gives us performance metrics to actually see what is going on and then to make better decisions going forward. So this brings me to some of the work that we've done at the National Urban Observatory. So this was based on a project that we had with the UN Habitat and the then Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, where we've been able to gather urban indicators across 36 states of the Federal Republic, which is available to be queried online. And some of these indicators cut across police to population ratio, local government per capita income, level of informal employment, and the likes. It goes on. But then to round up, I'd like to just focus on some of the benefits that we can see across board. So for every stakeholder, there's a benefit, there's a value of approaching, or rather taking this approach. For the citizens, they get to benefit from personalized services that are better tailored to suit their needs. They have access to more contextual information, and they get access to there's transparency in seeing how decisions are being made in the public sector. And for business leaders as well, it offers them these benefits that help them manage their businesses better and help them spot opportunities for business. Now, this also cascades down to city leaders and policymakers in helping them make more informed decisions and then exposing opportunities for revenue growth and overall economic growth. So in conclusion, urban renewal is often thought of in the context of large, expensive projects. While such projects may well provide enormous benefits, they are complex to manage and difficult to finance. But I think we can also bear in mind, or we should also bear in mind, that there are comparative small and simple changes that we can make to the way things are done that can prove and provide immediate benefits while paving the way for the implementation of the larger solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward, for that. Thank you, Edward, for the presentation. And right now we'll move on to the question and answer session. We have a couple of questions from our attendees. The first question is from Felicia Phillips, who says, there is a need to build housing as part of creating new towns, new economic centers, response to regional distribution of economic activities, even within states. So what drives what really? Housing to encourage economic activities, or economic activity that needs housing to make it survive? I think I would like to pose this question to Claudio, knowing that he has had the background, experience in different countries.
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Okay. This is from Felicia Phillips. There is a need to build housing as part of creating new towns, new economic centers, response to regional distribution of economic activities, even within states. So what drives what? Housing to encourage economic activity, or economic activity that needs housing to make it survive?
That's a very interesting question, and very contemporary, because it brings us back to national development policies, and some of the countries have used the housing sector as an instrument to propel economic development. Mexico was one case, so building a lot of housing in different territories to promote economic development. That didn't work very well, because you need to combine jobs with where people will live, jobs with the type of decisions on the profile of that economic activity that fits that region. But indeed, it's a question of regional development that must be connected to a national urban development or human settlement development policy, where government puts in place a stimulus for particular development taking place in the territory. I'll go back to finalize this conclusion. I lived and worked in Brasilia, a new town like Abuja, but built in the central plateau of Brazil. And the strategy in the 1950s, when the city was planned, and it was inaugurated in 1960, so after 3 years of construction, was to push development to the hinterland of Brazil. It needed to have a number of activities, such as government administration and everything associated with that, in order to attract people And in a certain moment, it became clear that the city needed to take decisions about what kind of industrial development will be allowed within that concept of an administrative political city to allow jobs to be created and diversify the labor market and make possible that economic development would be sustained. So, crux of the matter, you cannot only think of housing or economic development because people need to live somewhere, but the economy needs to have a scale and have to have consumers for the production that is taking place on that activities. So this is a very complicated and not so easy question to answer if you don't have the broader context of the national development policy.
Thank you very much. I would like to go on to the next question specifically for Mrs. Ime. Seeing that countries like China have an oversupply issue, estimated at over 90 million units, according to the person who's asking the question, and are even restricting supply of credit and land approvals to developers, what can nations like Nigeria learn and do differently to close the housing gap? Should I repeat the question?
I got it. I got the question.
Great. Thank you.
I was just trying to unmute myself. So for the China issue, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in China on Chinese matter, but interestingly, a few days ago, I saw where a video circulating through WhatsApp where the state was actually destroying over 15 high-rise buildings, and I'm like, what? So I was in shock because we're looking for houses here, and there is China, bringing down structures. And the first thing that comes to my mind is like, my goodness, what would the investors do? Where are they going to recover the money that they've already invested? So from what I found out from that particular incident, it shows that for the Chinese case, so they had an excess liquidity, issue, which resulted from the exports that they had, engaged in. So there was a lot of fresh FDIs, and usually when there's high liquidity like that, it usually goes into real estate. And they also had the growth of the Chinese GDP over a period of more than 3 decades. And so this was also one of the factors that increased in the demand for housing and the building industry. So I also noticed that for the bubble that happened in China, we also saw that after the issue they had with the financial crisis in 2008, they now had a situation where the government was open to FDI, and then the private enterprise were allowed in. So there was a lot of foreign money coming into the market. So there was a lot of increased, earnings due to low interest rates. So some of these factors were some of the things that got China to where they ended up having, more supply than demand for the houses that they built. And then trying to compare China with Nigeria, I don't want to be too pessimistic to say we're going to get there like tomorrow or 5 years' time, but some of the policies that we've been implementing, it's, helping us to get to the point where we can have the low interest rate. And I keep saying it, as my other colleagues have mentioned, or what NMRC is doing. NMRC's, creation is actually to be able to leverage finances from the capital market and to be able to deepen the capital market. So when you have a capital market that is deep enough and you can also float, mortgage-based securities, that will be, some assets that investors will want to look into in your own market that will make, FDI to come into your market. And then we're also, with what NESG is doing with NBS, because for the housing sector, your demand should match your supply, or your supply should match your demand. And we've bandied this number of deficit in the housing sector from 17 to 20 million. Nobody actually knows the real number. So I know government was actually trying to do a real census, but I was very glad to know that NESG, entered into a collaboration with MBS to know the actual number. So for me, having that number, that real data, is what we will need, to be able to help us with our planning forward. And once you have those data, it helps you to determine where you actually need to build houses, where there's deficit and where you need to address. So in the near term, I don't see us having that issue with China, but it's good that we're learning, or we've looked at issues of oversupply in China to see how we can avoid it in future. But having those data to help us determine the kind of demand we should address in a particular location would help us to avoid the issue that China has, or China had. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And finally, this would be the last question I'll be taking from Omwa Kalen. It is a historical fact that industry shapes housing demand. Some of Nigeria's early housing estates were industrial estates. Is there any connection between the housing gap and the industrial gap? I'll pose this question to Hakeem.
Are you hearing me?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think generally, I always also like to stress that the housing sector cannot outrun the economy. So at any point in time, you have to look at the macro fundamentals. So where industries have been going down, disposable income has been falling, people have not been doing very well, obviously to also have a negative impact on the housing segment. So there could be some correlation between the fall of industrial development and also the housing deficit that we're talking about. But at the end of the day, what we always, and Claudia already mentioned that point very eloquently. Housing helps to catalyze the economy. And when we get to a level that we understand that, and we pay the attention, we match our words with action, as a country, I believe that we'll begin to see the rub-off effect of both industry and housing on industry, and vice versa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very prompt response. And at this point, I would like to call Mr. Nana Ude, who would be giving us our closing remark. He's the board member, Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and facilitator, Infrastructure Policy Commission. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Irene, and thank you to all the panelists. The conversations that we've had today has really accentuated the fact that the urgency of a robust housing and urban development sector has become even more apparent, primarily due to the rapid rate of urbanization and population growth. The World Economic Forum projects that by 2050, 7 out of 10 people will be living in urban areas. So the future of our cities will depend on the way we manage urbanization. And public-private collaboration will be central to sustainable urban housing and development. So while there are clear opportunities, we also have challenges to implementing a transformative housing and urban development agenda that will make our cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable for us to meet Goal 7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So this calls upon all our national and subnational governments to prioritize provision of housing and create an enabling environment for housing and urban development. And these are the key issues that we have heard here today from our panelists. So these discussions have been very insightful, and we're looking forward to the outcomes to be very impactful as we look forward to a glorious housing and urban development sector for Nigeria. Thank you very much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next Nigerian Economic Summit coming up on October 25th and 26th here in Abuja. If you haven't registered, please register, and then let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nana. Thank you so much to everyone, all of our panelists, the planning committee, the Nigerian Economic Summit group, and those at the comms team as well. Thank you so much for making this such a seamless engagement this afternoon. And like Mr. Nana said, we look forward to seeing you all at the 27th Nigerian Economic Summit. Please, the link is being shared in the chat box. If you haven't registered, kindly do so. And at this point, I'd like to sign out. Thank you, everyone. God bless Nigeria. Bye.